My name is Jeffrey Lancaster. I'm the Emerging Technologies Coordinator in the Science and Engineering Libraries at Columbia University. I'm going to introduce our panelists. And then today we're going to talk about the digital centers at Columbia University. So I put our pictures up so that you can know who we are. So to my left is Jane Winland. She's the Director of the Science and Engineering Libraries at Columbia. And then to her right is my colleague Ashley Jester, who is the Data Services Coordinator in the Digital Social Science Center. Excuse me. So today, I don't know that you can see this. I'm going to post the slides for this later today, both on SlideShare and at our institutional repository, which is called Academic Commons. And the scope for the talk today is, we've broken it up into three parts. First, Jane is going to talk about space, and space is an issue, I think, for everyone. And from there, we're going to try and understand how these spaces were built and what the services are that actually go on in each of the spaces. And then from there, we're going to talk about how each of these spaces actually works together. And then from that notion about collaboration, we're going to come back and talk about some new spaces that we're developing at Columbia and where we're going in the future. And so with that, I will turn it over to Jane.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. I've often said about Columbia University, and it's probably true of all urban campuses, it's all about space and learning and whatever might go on, but there's always that whole issue of space and what space is allocated for. We have these three digital centers, and they have a history of approximately 2 decades. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview, not in too much detail, of how we got to where we are today, and a few ideas about where we might go in the future. We did not begin with the ideas of digital scholarship necessarily. And it starts in the Lehman Library of the Social Sciences, which is a building that was designed in the 1960s and opened in early 1971. So you can imagine the technical infrastructure in the building was practically non-existent. We were lucky to have a few plugs to plug in vacuum cleaners, let alone anything else beyond that. The library was a huge space. It was designed originally to service the School of International Affairs, and over the next 2 decades, we added government documents, we added area studies, we added the School of Social Work library, we added storage space for colleagues in medical libraries and our Star East Asian library. So the library itself had very little unique identity. And one of the things that began, and I think this is true of a lot of large academic research libraries, digital scholarship began with data centers, and basically numeric data centers. And that's what happened in Lehman Library. That was another thing that was located in there. And data services, numeric data services were basically funded on soft money until that ran out, and then the libraries very wisely took over the funding administration of numeric data services. At the same time, there was an idea floating around, something called a tech loft. And this was not what we were going to call a typical lab. We didn't want just a student lab that students came in and did whatever it is that they wanted to do, but there was no program behind it. That we wanted to design something that would provide an environment where faculty and students would come together, use high-end equipment, have discussions about this and that and whatever. So time marches on, and we finally came up with an idea of creating a center where we could indeed, in Lehman Library, create such a space. And in, I think it was at the same time we had a data center, and we had also created a student lab. So how could we make these various pieces work together? And so we created the space, which we then called the Digital Social Science Center, which exists today. And I bet every one of you who's been involved in any kind of space planning has said, this time we're going to get it right, and we're going to look into the future, and we are going to get it absolutely right. Well, if you can manage to project space into the future and stay ahead of technological developments, good luck. It's very difficult. Maybe it's impossible to do. I don't know. But nevertheless, we opened the center, and we had an interesting situation as far as, this is how collection development fits in this, is that the social sciences at Columbia in the libraries as well as the academic departments adopted very quickly electronic information. And therefore, we noticed that government documents, like these shelves over here, were under very good light. And no one was looking at these print government documents, and the patrons were sort of in dark corners. So why wouldn't we move the paper print government documents? And the same thing with current periodicals. Most of the key journals in the social sciences were now in electronic form. So those were two of the things that sort of pushed the agenda in small renovation opportunities. The space itself, the Social Science Center, we had flexible furniture. The idea was that we could take the furniture up and down and move it around so that students could work in groups, because group study was becoming more and more popular. What we did not have or didn't anticipate, one, was that you had to have programs behind the space in order to make it what you wanted it to. And second, patrons dictate how space is going to be used. And so any kind of conversations that we wanted to go on at this group study areas, people would say, I'm sitting here, I'm not moving, and don't you know you're in a library and you should be quiet. So let's move on from there to the Digital Science Center, which opened in a new science building. The library opened in 2009, and it was designed by a very well-known international architect. The idea was to have 33,000 square feet of science library space. We ended up with a little over 11,000 square feet. You know how that happens as well. And from the day it opened, it was a problem. First of all, we had no designated space that was going to be called the Digital Science Center, yet our director wanted us to have a Digital Science Center. So I called these machines the Digital Science Center. But it's not a discrete space, it isn't walled off, it isn't a space where you can shut the door. And the furniture, because the architects had an aesthetic sense that they didn't want any wire showing, we had to go through some elaborate construction, and all that furniture is nailed to the floor. So from the day it opened, it was a problem, and is a problem to this day, but you'll hear later how we're hoping to change it a little bit. The Digital Humanities Center is in Butler Library, a library that was opened in the late 1930s and renovated, a decade-long renovated process that began in 1995 and continued to 2005. Once again, an architect's vision of what an academic library should look like, with large, very elaborate carrels that, take up an enormous amount of space. And there have been plans for a very long time to have a Digital Humanities Center based on what was called the Electronic Text Service. And the Electronic Text Service was initially, there was equipment, software for text analysis, and scanners. And it became initially a scanning hub. Anybody who wanted to scan anything, because there weren't that many in libraries or anywhere else, would go to the Electronic Text Service. Now, it was a little more difficult to sell the idea of a Digital Humanities Center in a library that was renovated to and very high-end architects who created a reference desk that was still an absolute, it looks like a ship. It's so big that when you're standing there behind it, it's like you're at the prow of a huge ship. And lots of immobile furniture and a massive, massive card catalog. Now, in order to make those changes, it's one thing to do it in a science library. It's another thing to do it in a humanities library with a long tradition of reference service and print material and humanists who want everything at their fingertips immediately and that sort of thing. So it's migrated very slowly. However, one of the most successful spaces that's been opened over the last 20 years is something called the Studio at Butler. And all it is a room with a door that locks, a space that you can schedule. It has tables, it has chairs, a big LCD panel, and movable whiteboards. And the requirements are that you sign up for it and that you take your trash with you when you leave, because you can eat in there. It has been amazing, the programs that have been developed for that space. Faculty seem to like it. You could have anything in there from high-end technology meetings to discussions on Melville. It's a very exciting and interesting idea. And I tickled at the immense amount of money that we've spent on architects and the immense amount of time that we've spent on designing these centers, and yet this particular room, to me, is something that I think is very exciting and very interesting. So in conclusion about space, what I think I would have to say is that sometimes we overplan, and I think that if I were going to do it all over again, and I've been involved in a lot of these projects for several decades now, is to just have open spaces with lots of plugs. Still at this stage, Wi-Fi has replaced in many ways the need for networked access. But I think students still, where are the outlets, and until the need for outlets it goes away, that's still going to be one of the prime things that you have to have. But, so what's the emphasis on space? Students still do not have capacity in their dorm rooms or at home or on their equipment for a lot of the software that we have available in these centers. Students still have to go someplace to study. The dorms, certainly at an institution like Columbia, are far from ideal, and so our libraries are jammed with students, and they're spending a fortune and often sitting on the floor. During finals, it's that crowded, so that still developing these digital centers associated with a particular space or spaces continues to be very, very important. So one of the things that I think we've learned over time is the importance of programs, what goes on in these centers, and what makes them unique from just simply computer labs. Ashley?
Yes. So I'm going to talk about where the digital centers are today, and really with a focus on the services. And for us, I think our services are really centered around three key elements, which is the experts that we employ, the resources and services that they provide, and the technology that kind of is the backbone and allows us to do all of that. But I'm going to start with the thing that I think is the most important, which is the experts. And I maybe make a kind of controversial claim here, but I'd say that's the most valuable thing that any library really has, is the humans who work there. Our collections are great, the technology's great, but without experts and the people around to help, it's kind of an empty space. So what do our experts do, and how do we structure that? For the digital centers, there was a conscious choice to make a decision to hire people who had subject expertise in a particular discipline. And so I'm one of those folks who actually doesn't have any formal training in librarianship. And similar to Jeffrey, both of us are PhDs in fields related to the disciplines in which we work. And that was a choice that they made to bring in subject experts who would be able to talk to researchers on their own terms. And so we've kind of made a point of really blending the traditional roles that maybe had been separated of subject and technical expertise into a single position. And we really kind of ask that all of the staff who work in the Digital Social Science Center, the Digital Science Center, the Digital Humanities Center are both subject and technical expertise, and experts, excuse me. And the reason that we make that choice is that we want to be able to support all of the technology that we have in these centers. And so we make a point of not promoting anything that we can't support, but in order to do that, we actually need to have the people who can offer that support. As I kind of gave a hint, there's also sort of the idea that we need to be able to speak the language of our researchers, and I think just from watching the keynote this morning, it is reminded again that the language of our different disciplines really are very different, and the way that we talk about research the kinds of objects that we study, and even just the way that we think about studying them is so different. And it really requires that kind of foundational grounding in academic research. And so bringing that academic research experience to the experts who we hire is really important for us to be able to, when a researcher comes into one of our spaces, to be able to engage with them directly on a more collegial kind of level, and to, actually, for me, it's one of the best things about the job is to be able to have those kind of intense peer-to-peer conversations and work with folks to refine their research question and help them to develop their ideas more completely. And I think that's something that, I draw every day on my background in political science when I do that. So I think that another thing that we've done, and this is sort of, we all have been evolving, and we continue to evolve as we do this. And as Jane sort of hinted, the technology field is always changing and always emerging, and so we're always sort of forcing ourselves to keep up. And I'm going to say the word that I know is kind of a bad word to say around is reskilling, and I don't really like that. I think much more to think about it is professional development. We all have the ability to grow and to learn new skills and to develop ourselves as professionals, and that's really another point that we've emphasized. When positions have opened up, we've made a point of filling those positions with subject and technical expertise, technical experts that we hadn't had before. But we still have a lot of people who have been around since before the digital centers were created. And what are they doing? They're learning along with the rest of us, and we're working together to advance where we're headed. And I think really that to me is sort of one of the key elements of the digital centers, is that we recognize that everybody has different skills to bring, and that we can really leverage those, and really to empower staff to self-identify as experts. Everybody is an expert at something. And so the real question is for us to be able to allow staff to say, here's what I feel comfortable being an expert in, and here's where I can add my value. And really working together. And collaboration is the key to our success, and I think Jeffrey will talk a little bit more about how we collaborate across the centers, but even within each individual center, we all have different areas of expertise. I am an expert in statistical methodology. We have other folks in the Digital Social Science Center who are experts in GIS and mapping, and we have other folks who have really great traditional reference skills and can really do the deep dives with students on the literature review and the kind of foundational research elements. And we bring all of our stuff together, and that's how we are able to be successful. So we've got our experts. What do they work with? What do? They provide resources and services. And I think some of the stuff that we do is stuff that you would expect. We have books. We still do have books and paper and print materials. And the nice thing is that all of our digital centers are housed within these libraries that still have these physical collections present. And so we're able to very quickly go to the physical collections when we need them and access them. And as Jane hinted, we also have developed extensive electronic collections. Some of our disciplines more than others, but it's present all across the libraries. And we have data. I think this is becoming, again, more and more of a typically expected service that libraries are going to be able to provide, that they're going to have data. And for us, data includes maps, it includes numeric data, it includes qualitative data. We really try to emphasize the whole way around. But we might have some things that maybe you don't expect, or maybe don't expect to find in a library. So Jane already mentioned the studio at Butler. Here's a little picture of it. Sorry for the size. This is actually from an event that was held there. That was a vintage video game event where we brought in some rather old technology, Atari 2600s, and even older than that, some very old Macintosh computers, and set them up. And as Jane hinted, the space itself is so flexible that it allowed us to really bring what we want to that space. And that was a new development for us at Columbia, and it really has become a place where anybody can go and do pretty much anything, because it's kind of an empty platform and it's a vessel that you fill with your idea. Another thing that maybe is unexpected, or I think it's becoming more common, but it was certainly new for us, is 3D printing. And that's actually, the 3D printer lives in Jeffrey's office, and he administers the programming around it. But this is another experiment where we have provided this resource for students. Some of them maybe would have access if they are engineers or in the science disciplines where they have departmental access. But for most of our students, that's not an option. And so what we're trying to do here at the library is to provide that option for everyone, so that anyone who wants to be engaged with this new medium can actually get involved with it. And the third thing is really the stuff that I focus on, which is statistical consulting. And that is something I know that I heard earlier this morning that they do here, but it's not always something that you find embedded in the library itself and being performed by librarians. And this actually feeds just out of our natural relationship with the data we provide. We provide the data itself, and then we also actually provide the expertise around using that data to help people get active. And that expertise goes, not just being able to use the actual software programs that we provide, but really trying to add some value on the actual methodology side and talking to folks about, all right, this is your question, what kind of data do you need to answer that question? All right, well, what kind of test do you need to be able to analyze that question? Are there validity checks that we can do and help you with? And really, this is, again, something that varies from discipline to discipline. I'm speaking from a social science background, but we have, data in science, and there's data in the digital humanities as well. And what we've been able to do with those subject expertise is really have someone who can speak the language of the data of the discipline to the researchers, so that when they come in, they're actually getting help that's tailored to what they need. And then the third thing is really our technology. And so I think for all of us, we know that technology really is that blend of opportunity and challenge. And it, gives us a lot of room to grow, but it also reminds us of things that we need to be mindful of. For us on the technology side, I think our opportunities are, we have this high-end technology right there accessible. We're able to provide that point-of-need assistance to students. When they're running into a problem with their R code, they can raise their hand and get someone to come over right away and help. When they're trying to create a 3D model, they can ping Jeffrey and have him come over and help them with their CAD drawings. And so we can provide that point-of-need assistance. We can also provide more assistance to our remote users. This is something that we've been able to expand on more recently. And really, without technology, we just wouldn't be able to provide a lot of the remote user services that we're able to engage in now. And I think really having that technology embedded in the libraries, surrounded by the technical and subject experts, is really, we're trying to position at least, and hopefully I think we are there, to position the library as the hub of research and learning. This is the place where naturally researchers from different disciplines are going to mix, where you're going to run into colleagues from other disciplines within your major area, from the social sciences, and you're also going to run into colleagues who may be in a very different discipline than you. But we think that we can provide that space where everybody can come together around the idea of research and learning and really make the libraries that hub. So what are some of the challenges? I think the first and foremost is staying ahead of our users, or at least staying caught up to them. At least once a week, a student comes in with a new idea, a new research question, a new question about software that is, I like to say, not just the cutting edge, we're talking about the bleeding edge at this point. They are really pushing the envelope as far as they can. It may not be possible for us to stay up to date with the bleeding edge, but I think we want to try to stay as far as we can along the cutting edge and really be there to be able to provide the services that student needs. And part of that challenge also is, balancing this access and security. I think any of us who've worked in large organizations with university IT understand that a lot of the computers we have a lot of restrictions on the kinds of things that you can do with them, and that's done for very good reason. We don't want to spread malware all over the internet because of someone writing the script, but at the same time, as students are becoming more engaged with programming languages, with scripting languages, with wanting to be able to do things on the computer that the computer, as it's currently configured, does not allow them to do, we're really learning to figure out that balance between giving students the access they need to do the research that they would like, and still keeping our environment secure and making sure that we're not, creating a massive problem for our university IT. And I think, all of this focus on technology and looking forward, to me, the biggest challenge really is to remember that we don't want to lose sight of those traditional services that we provide. And I think this is, especially for someone who doesn't have a traditional librarian background, it's really something I have to remind myself every day, is that, yeah, there are a lot of our users out there who are, working on this cutting edge stuff and really kind of pushing the envelope. But there are a lot more who just need kind of traditional library services, who maybe didn't go to orientation and don't know how to use the catalog to find materials, who don't understand how to access electronic resources, who need help finding reference materials for their research paper. And so as much as we want to be able to provide the services and the support for this emerging technology, we also want to make sure that we're not going to lose sight of our traditional services. And being able to keep that really is something that we have to make kind of a personnel decision to make sure that we're not solely focused on the future, but that we're also thinking about what's going on now and meeting the needs of our patrons where they are.
So I'm just going to wrap up by talking about how these different centers actually work together. So Ashley mentioned everybody's an expert in something, but nobody can be an expert in everything. And so how the different centers fit together is a work in progress. I think all of what we all do is a work in progress. There's this real sense of distribution among the centers. So one of the best things that we've done is facilitate the communication around who is an expert in a particular software program, who is the expert for a particular technique, a particular methodology. And this is great among our 3 centers, but there are other people throughout the university, and we actually tap them too and bring them into this sense of collaboration. So first and foremost, what any library does, we set up a working group to do this. I'll mention who's on the working group in a second. But it really is to facilitate communication among these different centers. There are a number of decisions that end up being joint decisions. There are a number of decisions that end up affecting multiple centers. If each of these different areas was operating in isolation, it would be an absolute mess, and there would be a lot of duplicity among what each group was doing. There, on this working group, there's staff from each center, there's staff from our IT group, and we also actually have colleagues from our Center for Digital Research and Scholarship. And this is another part of the organization that's sort of within the libraries, but isn't specifically a digital center. So one of the things that I would suggest is that your organization start to think about who are the other people who might be doing some of the same things that you're doing, whether they are part of your organization or just part of the university as a whole. And so some of the things that we do, one of the major things that each of the digital centers does is provide software on really high-end computers. And that's going to be software that people can't just run on their own, that they can't afford to put on their own machine, things like that. Well, that's a huge logistical question about how to get the software on the machines, who's going to pay for that software, all of those things. How do we do maintenance? Who's what we call the service owner? That means the contact person that when you need help with that program, we've distinguished that from a technical owner, which is our IT group. They're the people who are going to fix it if you're getting an error or something like that. I'll talk a little bit more about some of that stuff in a bit. We also work together to plan workshops and to plan events. We work together to basically coordinate our response with our library IT group. And so we've set up a number of policies and a number of protocols and a number of procedures for how do we order new software. What do we do when we want to upgrade software? Because the worst thing that can happen is IT just upgrades the software and you're not expecting it and you think you've got one version of it, but you don't anymore. And that's the version that somebody actually needed. And then a number of special projects, which I'll talk about too. One of the special projects that we've done, which has been one of the sort of kind of most revolutionary things that we've done, is we've started to treat software as part of our collection. So in addition to the print material, the databases, the journals, all the electronic things, electronic books, electronic journals, we've actually started including software in our catalog. But to do that has been quite a process. And we actually set up a whole system using a large Google spreadsheet to track all of this, had our IT group write a script to be able to populate MARC records. So now, when somebody searches for MATLAB, they're not just going to get books about MATLAB and research articles that might have used MATLAB. They're actually going to get where can they find MATLAB, tutorials about MATLAB, things like that right in that same sort of results list. We've also worked together quite extensively on citation management support. One of the things that we did was we assessed and then got rid of RefWorks. So making those kind of university-wide decisions, not just about what to get, but about what to remove or what to stop paying for, it has to be done collaboratively. And then finally, a special project that we started a little while ago was starting to take a skills inventory. So we think we know who the experts in certain things are, but giving staff, professional staff, the opportunity to self-identify as having expertise, not just in software, but also in professional skills, in IT skills, in different languages, for instance. Pulling all of that information together in one place so that we can have sort of an internal working repository of skills. So after that working group operated for a little while, it then became clear that we needed an advisory group. And so there was sort of a move to separate out the coordinator level positions like Ashley and myself, and then the director level positions to whom we report, and to start to think about what's the relationship and what's the goal setting scheme and how can we make sure that we're addressing the right priorities for each of these centers. So this advisory group surfaces common issues, strategizes for all of the digital centers together, and then, most importantly, approves budgetary requests. Okay, the advisory group is 3 divisional directors, the director of our IT, the library's IT, and then the 3 coordinators who primarily oversee each of the centers, so Ashley, me, and then our colleague in the humanities. So some of the things that we've been doing. When the centers were formed, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, there were no budgets for them. So Jane talked about this sort of historic track of, these are centers that have developed from other things, but there was never a line item for, okay, the digital centers will get this much money in order to do this. And so what we've had to do is really carve out and better understand how much will we spend on software. We've also been saddled with things like, okay, you will now provide EndNote out of your budget. Okay, site license for EndNote is a tremendous cost. Software ordering and approval procedures, so I mentioned those earlier. Interaction with IT, which is always sort of a constant push and pull. How do we set priorities? Is a machine down a priority? Is updating software a priority? Is new software a priority? Things like that. And then finally, developing an internship program where what we've been able to do is work with our Graduate School of Arts and Sciences to provide money to current graduate students to work with librarians on particular projects. Some of the centers have projects that are sort of to their benefit. That's how we work in the sciences. Some projects are things like working on somebody's PhD thesis, and maybe they need a text encoding piece of it, or maybe they need a mapping component to map Icelandic folk songs, things like that. So there's a wide range of the types of projects that these graduate students are working on, but this program allows them some space and some money and some expertise to really focus on these types of digital projects. Okay, so I mentioned I would talk about budgets. Also, I'm trained as a chemist, so I really like Breaking Bad. So anyway, apologize for these pictures, but I don't. Okay, anyway. So I mentioned that there was no single budget that established the digital centers, and this has been problematic. So we talked about how the humanities came from electronic text services, the social sciences came from electronic data services, and the sciences got sort of glommed onto a building that was already existing, but it wasn't a real thing, even though it's kind of a real thing. So what we've had to do is to figure out not only what is the expected cost of software, but how are we going to provide for new software? How are we going to maintain the software? Because a lot of these licenses have maintenance fees associated with them. And so the working group and the advisory group, it has to be a collaborative effort to manage this budget. So it gets really complicated really fast. But we're now starting to see that we're the ones who are responsible for a number of campus-wide site licenses, things like ChemBioDraw, things like EndNote. So we're now the ones being approached because we have the expertise to judge, is this something that we want to get? We have the technical expertise to figure out, is this a good deal? Is this what we want to do? But we also have the contact with the patrons to try and identify, is this something that people are going to use or not? And we've been able to make decisions accordingly. And so we work with other groups across campus. Columbia is a very distributed kind of bureaucratic institution. So we work with certain institutes, certain centers, certain schools, all of whom might have their own particular situations. But all of that is built up from, to tie it back to what Ashley was saying, having that expertise allows us to form the relationships that we can then go and have these conversations. Without that, all of this is kind of a non-starter. Nobody wants to show up and be like, let's talk about the budget. Right? But if you already have that relationship because you're helping support their research, then you can say, hey, maybe we can do more with this GIS license than what you're doing right now. So with that, that has started to inform a number of the new spaces that we're developing, and so Jane is going to talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I already talked about the studio at Butler, which is another example you have up here. Yeah. And as the Digital Humanities Center expands, the card catalog goes away. We joke about taking card catalogs away in the dead of night and then saying next, I don't know what happened. Anyway, we do recycle the cards. We have pulled selected faculty members' cards and given them to them as presents, which they really seem to get a big kick out of for some reason or other. I don't know. I told you that we had some major issues in the Digital Science Center. From the day it opened, I wanted to start tearing down the first floor of the library because all this stuff was nailed down. And we have no instruction space. We have no programmatic space. We have some very distinguished scholars in the sciences. There are lots of other areas at Columbia. We can't have a book talk or anything of that sort because the furniture doesn't move. So beginning in the summer of 2015, we are going to take down a section of this wooden stuff that's nailed to the floor. I keep talking about having a bonfire, but and we're going to create an innovation space. And the space will be everything from a 3D printing marathon to programs, book talks, presentations on software, whatever it is that we decide we want to do. And the tables in here will fold up, the chairs can be moved or added, and I think it's a very exciting proposition. We will be ordering equipment that I'm not sure where we're going to put the equipment when it's not in use. When we don't have programs going on, this space will simply be divided off by theater ropes. We can take them down and students can study on these tables. It's always a big thing if you subtract study space. Losing study seats is a real no-no. So really looking forward to doing that, and maybe that will be the first step in moving away more of that furniture that's nailed to the floor. It is in the new library, probably the last new library space that Columbia will build. And it has wonderful views of Riverside Church, and it's a really impressive space that students from all over campus, whether they have anything to do with the sciences or not, use the space. So we're hoping to make more progressive use of the space and make it much more of a digital science center with programs behind it.
And so with that, we are coming upon question time. Hopefully you heard about some things that might relate to your particular institution or your particular situation. We love talking about this stuff, so hopefully there are some questions. This is why I'm giving you time to think about it and stand up. Great, so please.
My name is Roger Zender from Case Western. I was really intrigued with your inventory of expertise. Is that expertise that is just within the digital centers, or are you actually reaching out to the larger university community for this database?
So initially we were just looking at doing professional staff within the libraries. So, I mean, a lot of people have these old archives of files. So I, at one point, found this, it was a language inventory where library staff had basically claimed certain languages that I guess they could translate. And so we started thinking about what's a way to both bring that up to date, but do it in a better way than just having an Excel sheet sitting on a server somewhere. And so have been developing the skills inventory as a way of having kind of a sustainable mechanism by which people can claim skills that they, again, only as an internal resource. We're not quite ready to make this sort of a public thing and say, hey, if you need help with MATLAB, see me, anything like that. So it really is for kind of people doing reference to say, oh, you have a MATLAB question, maybe you could talk to this person.
And that was actually the second part of my question, was do you make this available to the public? Because it seems like that might be counter to getting people to sign up to identify as being experts in certain areas.
Right now, we're not planning to, and this is something that's just been sort of in development. But the goal of it was to have it be an internal document. Now, what's interesting about it also is that, so the way it works, it's a pretty simple thing. There are a couple of Google Forms that people can just sort of claim what they want expertise in. We also, at the same time, we're planning to have that same list of skills, but people can request what they want training in at the same time. And so being very clear that this isn't tied to performance evaluation, it's not tied to salary or anything like that, it's a completely voluntary thing. But there was talk in the libraries that people said, I want to put together a grant. Who are the other people who've put together grants and know how to do this really well? Or who are the other people who know how to put together a really awesome presentation? Who can I talk to about this? And there was no forum for sharing those, ability to claim those skills.
And then just the last part, have you thought about putting students into this as well, and some of the student expertise that you guys might be coming across?
That's interesting. We hadn't thought about that. I think we're always faced with the challenge of sort of the turnover of students and how that then fits into questions about sustainability and, I mean, staff moving through is high enough turnover. Would we want to deal with students? I think locally, so I mentioned that service ownership model. Like, I know who all of the people are. So we've set up this system where I might be the owner of a particular software program, but if there's like a really nuancy question, I know a number of professors who know the software much better than I do, and I can actually tap them, and they may know graduate students as well. So it's this network building that we're constantly engaged in, sort of relationship building piece of it, yeah. Question back here.
Yes. I was interested in the internship program that you had mentioned. So first, how many interns you have year to year, and then also you'd mentioned that they're paired with a librarian. Is that with the 3 coordinators that you had mentioned, or do they also get paired up with subject experts, and kind of what's the staffing behind that? Is it built into your time to work with these interns?
Jane, do you want to take that? Yeah.
Well, some of them have been matched up with coordinators, but they're also, we have 2 GIS librarians, so one of students, usually somebody's working with our GIS librarian. The person who runs what was called the electronic text service, somebody frequently works with him in either, some massive text analysis project. These people are also members of this digital center working group that Jeffrey talked about. So it's, they're matched up with people who have some context with the digital centers.
It's as much a part of the sort of alt-ac push. So half of the funding comes from the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, half comes from the libraries, typically from our GA budgets. And so the idea is not just to help them on their project and be sort of there to help them, but to expose them to what is librarianship nowadays? What are the skills that you might need to go into librarianship? And we've actually had a number of people, well, first of all, either get jobs out of the internship program or decide that they want to go into librarianship as a result of the program. So they weren't thinking about it beforehand, and they've actually gone to school for it afterwards.
And I just want to add in, even though everybody is sort of paired with a particular digital center, we really make a point of making sure that they get the connections through all of the library staff and the other digital centers that they need. So they have kind of a home base, but then we do a lot of networking and collaborative work with them.
It takes a village.
It does take a village.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Josh Boyer from North Carolina State. And I wondered, you described the studio, and I wondered about policies for, like, who can get it for what reason, and if that has tensions involved.
I mean, we're strapped for space. So, I mean, the thing that we didn't mention, so Columbia University is in Manhattan. We don't have a lot of space. It's funny, I was looking over here, so this last picture that I showed is about the size of that wall over there up to the power cord right here. It's not a tremendously big space. So the studio, it used to be an AV room, got switched over to being this kind of white box space with all these tables. It's been a project, and so it started off being very locked down. It's not open when it's not open. It's a joint effort between the teaching center, so the Graduate School Teaching Center, and the Digital Humanities Center. And so they've been very kind of protective of it because they don't want it to become just another place for people to sit and do their work that they're going to do anyway. And so currently all of it's been mediated by either the coordinator in the humanities or the head of the teaching center. And so if they are a co-sponsor, other groups are happy to, are glad to use it or welcome to use it. But aside from courses that have been kind of pre-approved by it, workshops that have been pre-approved by it, it is sort of locked down right now.
I would say ostensibly, it's any event that happens there is supposed to have some touch on digital pedagogy, but of course we know that that's really wide open, and so really those two folks who mediate the space kind of decide whether an event rises to the threshold of being able to use the studio.
Yeah.
Something I did with the studio is I've gotten tired of task forces that work for a year, write a report, and then everybody ignores it. So we were working on in the sciences on service to remote users, and we wanted to have a web page. So I invited all my colleagues who had any interest in remote users to this space one day, served pizza, said, tell me about your issues with remote users. I got a lot of information. That was the end of it. And it was really wonderful to have this space, and we don't have anything like it in the sciences. So I'm not saying it's a group meeting room necessarily, but it certainly came in handy in that respect, and it was an opportunity for people to be in a room to have a discussion about a current and very important library issue, but not have to feel I'm in a task force, my boss is here, I'm going to be, this sort of thing. So it was an interesting experiment. I'd like to do it again.
We've used their program plan in how we're planning for this space and what we're thinking about in the sciences tremendously. So it's been a really effective experience for them and for us.
That's good. I'll just add that we don't have a space exactly like that, but close enough. And the business of rejecting false positive, like people who just want to, the physics department just wants to have their departmental meeting there, some local business wants to, just on and on and on. That has been exhausting. And so.
It's not easy to find, particularly. It's not as upfront and sort of visible, and so you kind of have to know it's there, which so far has been advantageous for us.
Our main library, Butler Library, has a huge problem with that, and a lot of it is filmmakers. And even people like Steven Spielberg have wanted to use the library and pay maybe $1,500 for a day. Are you kidding? Anyway, so we have a lot of, who don't work in Butler don't see that weekly pressure to film something in our main library.
Well, thank you all for the questions. I've gotten the 1 minute sign. So we'll all be here through the rest of today and tomorrow, and we look forward to talking to you some more about this. So thank you.